We're here to talk about how circular economy can actually help boost people's careers and add value to that, whether that be as an employee in an organization or indeed setting up your own business. And I think the circular market really does lend itself to some new startups and innovation coming through. And some of the, I don't know if any of you heard the sessions this morning from the venture cap guys that are involved in LWAR, but really interesting stuff. And without me second guessing what to do, I think there is some money out there. But before we get into that whole piece, we need to kind of go back a little bit and look at the business scenario. And because everything that the Environmental Business Network does has business at the heart of what we do. The climate crisis provides the backcloth, if you will, to our stage, but our stage is very much about practicality and what business can do to move front and center. And I was introduced to or highlighted to a letter written by Larry Fink back in February. Larry Fink is the CEO of BlackRock. For those who don't know, BlackRock being the largest, I believe, investment business in the world with $8 trillion under management. So these guys have got power and influence. And there's a very interesting letter on their website, which I'd urge you to go and read, from Larry Fink to the invested companies that they work for. And it's pretty stark. He spells it out in pretty unequivocal language that the businesses they're looking to invest in will be ones that don't emit carbon, who are clean in growth, and who have the whole concept of ESG at their heart. Now that, to my mind, was a really big game changer, because whilst any type of movement, and particularly the whole environmental piece, needs consumer activism, and there's been some challenging but interesting stuff come out of organizations like Extinction Rebellion, you also need business to make a difference and to make permanent and lasting change. And this was a signal that was coming through very early on from Larry Fink and a whole bunch of others who are in the investment community. So there was pressure there to change. One of the things that we've learned from our many of our members who are corporate organizations as well as SMEs is that increasingly the tenders that people are getting are demanding a significant amount on sustainability and how the successful bidder will drive towards net zero. So again, more pressure coming through from the client sector, who in turn are funded by the investors. So this is all kind of building quite nicely. So where that's left a slightly interesting challenge there, I think, is that you have these large organizations, let's take the built environment, where people are running pretty huge projects on, whether it be Crossrail or HS2. And these are large organizations who are going to increasingly make greater demands on their value and supply chain to be better, to deliver innovation, and to, in a way, develop their ESG credentials for them. So there's a threat and opportunity to the whole supply chain there. The opportunity, which we'd rather focus on, is for those organizations who kind of get the whole ESG piece and actually looking at innovation and how they do that to increase their market share. And that opportunity, whilst not being simple, is definitely there. So whilst we see there's clearly a very powerful business imperative for organizations to change, actually not just attitude and behavior, but in favor of an ESG agenda, but in many cases a complete systemic change of how they've operated and what they've done. And one of the arguments that I hear business leaders say about the whole environmental, there's an interesting point, environmental, ESG, sustainability, there's too many different words to green, there's too many different words to describe the sector. It needs a little more clarity, I think. But one of the things I hear business leaders say to us is that it's all very well talking about that, but investment in ESG, there is a fear of change, a fear of its cost, and a lack of knowledge on how to effect this transition. And this segues quite nicely into the whole career piece, because the people who have the necessary skills and experience to help a business transition in a practical way are going to be in great demand. And this is potentially great career news for people who are environmental professionals or sustainability professionals in industry. So in fact, actually, there was a really interesting article in the FT going back again February sometime, which talked about, it seemed to say exactly that, basically, that skills and demand for people with environmental skills was going to be quite pronounced. And that seemed like great news for people who worked in environmental roles, because suddenly here they were going to be front and center of their organizations. However, and I think this is crucial, however, when you read that article in more depth, it's segued out of implying that people who worked in environmental roles in-house were in the best shape. So almost saying that MBA students and graduates and ambitious business executives of the future were going to meld environmental skills onto their business skills and therefore add a huge amount of value to their own CVs. So actually not at all about people who actually work in this sector in the first place. So I think in a way this places the whole environmental sector and ESG, if you care to call it that, at a crossroads. So the opportunity is to become the strategic advisors to their boards and to their clients that they want to be. But the threat is that the board actually go outside and bring in external consultants to do that job. So effectively we're looking at, so how does the whole profession in effect reinvent itself from being a technical one focused on regulation and compliance into one that is very much about the heart of the business. So this is where, as Ralph said, we've talked about this quite a lot, and we see there's some really interesting parallels between the transition from personnel to HR over the last 30 years. And you know, whilst we're on the theme of grey hairs, I can certainly remember when I first started working as a recent graduate way back in the 80s, the personnel function, as it was known at the time, was at very best an administrative one. It was where people went to worry about their holidays and about what their overtime pay rates were. And it was very admin oriented. Somewhere down the line, over the last 30 years, it's transitioned itself to becoming arguably the second or third most important function around a boardroom table. And I think we'd be right to say there's pretty much an HR director on the main board of every FTSE 100 company. Ralph, you may have a view on that, but I would suspect that was the case. Question we must ask ourselves is, how many environmental directors are there on main boards?